Okay, guys, in 15 seconds, my show is going to start. Those of you who are here, very welcome. Those of you out there, well, you can stay there. So, are you ready? 5 seconds. Let's start.
Let's go!
So let's get things straight here. I'm going to be staying here for like 40 minutes. I'm going to be telling you a bunch of lies because there's no way that I could remember stuff that happened 30 years ago. But since you're here, let's take it from this part. Well, as you know, NoiseTracker is a music program, and this program has sold like 0 copies ever. It had earned a lot of money. No, it hasn't. It has earned $0 billion. But what I got from NoiseTracker was a bunch of mails, not emails, because that wasn't invented back then, a bunch of letters from people being happy with this music program. I got letters from, well, you name it, every musician that you ever heard about, and from Barry Leach who wanted to do business with us, etc. But I guess I didn't answer any of those letters because I just didn't have the time. It was a time for stuff like that. By the way, who am I? Well, I'm this guy over here. I'm Pex Mahoney Tufvesson. I used to look like this. So, I mean, this is back in the 1980s. I even made my own shorts from some kind of frog stuff. And, well, we had this, yeah, it was fun times actually. So around the time of NoiseTracker, this was what I looked like. I had a very good friend, Cactus. He's over there. Stand up, please. So that was the way Cactus looked when I met him, actually. So can you imagine this being your best friend ever? Well, that was my best friend ever. He's a guy who taught me a lot about, well, the fun part of mathematics and the boring part of mathematics. So and he taught me how to play with Austrian firecrackers without doing something stupid. Anyway, together the two of us are Mahoney and Cactus. This is what we looked like when we went to parties. Well, you can see the 1084 monitor, etc., and everything. I'm going to take you back to the 1980s to start with, because the life in the 1980s was very different compared to life nowadays. For instance, we used paper money to pay for things. We don't do that anymore now. You always had a lot of time. You had no distractions. You had no internet. You had no smartphones. You had a lot of free time compared to nowadays. So if imagine something like this would never happen in the 1980s, because you wouldn't run a red light in the 1980s, because once you got to the post office, you knew that you would be standing there in the queue for 20 minutes anyway. So where's the rush? There's no rush really. So let's get back to where we started. This one. Has anybody seen this screen before? Yay! When I was a kid, I used to stare at this screen for hours. I mean, watching every pixel, seeing the interlaced details of everything. Well, that's a lie, because normally they'd only show this clock 15 minutes ahead of when the program started. And imagine Swedish television on a Saturday. They took an 18-hour break, transmitting nothing, just showing you static noise. That's life. But sometimes they made an exception.
En andra plats och en sjätte. Fast det går bättre nu i början än vad det gjorde senast. Där ringer man iväg. möjligen kan vara lite en aning försiktig i första.
Now, can you imagine that Sweden took a break whenever this happened? So for 15 minutes you had a whole country doing absolutely nothing except for staring at Ingmar Stenmark when he went skiing. At my school we were 300 pupils, all of us gathered in front of a 27-inch TV watching this. There's only 15 seconds left, he's gonna win, so I guess you knew that already.
Det där var ett fint år. Slåt den som kan, ska jag säga, men jag ska inte bli övermodig. Bojan är ju...
Okay, I guess you knew that already. So, you're everybody wondering, what the hell has this to do with NoiseTracker? Okay, you don't realize how slow things were in the 80s, but just to give you an example of where we're going, I'm starting up NoiseTracker 1.1. I'm loading a module that takes quite a while because reading all the files from your floppy disk. Well, you knew if you have a lot of files that takes a lot of time. But anyway, as you can see, this lovely graphics, we didn't have anyone doing the graphics, so we did everything ourselves. We're loading a module that's called Complication. Anyone has heard the module Complication before? So, my question for you. Who did this module? Danko! That's the first correct answer for today. Here's an M for you. Okay, I guess you know already where we're going, but I'm going to switch to show you something else. Anyone seen this guy before? Okay, this is Duke Nukem. He was invented in 1991, so that's way past what we're doing here. But he is the role model, and he was modeled after another guy from the Swedish television. What they were doing in the 1980s was stuff like this.
Som tränger igenom både väggar och dörrar hela tiden. Televerket har 20 såna här pejlmottagare och de är väldigt effektiva. De kan ta och avslöja en påslagen tele på långt håll. 1 november började vi med att pejla 10 olika städer i veckan. Vi är nu ute i trapphuset och vi ser att vi har signalen med hela tiden. Jag stänger nu dörren.
Well, you realize what kind of country Sweden was back in 1980s. What happened was that if you happen not to pay your television, you can always assume that this Duke Nukem guy came knocking on your door when you least expected it. Another thing that happened was that the Swedish police actually opened both mine and Cactus letters that we got in our mailbox because they were investigating if we were doing any carding, and carding at that time was if you bought something with someone else's Visa's card. We never did, some guy in Fairlight did, but we happened to be in the member list, so we never cracked any games either. So, my second question for today, who are these two guys? Any guess? My parents, they're my parents. And who said it? Whoa, here's a copy of George Orwell's 1984 for you. And read it, it's probably the most important book today. Okay, give it to someone else. These are my parents. I want to thank them for being here. What happened with them was that they married not for love, but they married because of bostadspolitik. So they got married to get a student apartment in Lund back in the 60s somewhere. You weren't allowed to live together in an apartment in Lund unless you were married. So they married a week before they started studying in Lund. What happened then was this. So This is me. This is my first girlfriend, I guess. A few years later, I looked like this. So this is me together with my brothers and together with a neighbor. What happens was that this guy, my brother Lars, he started programming the ABC-80 computer. And he did a lot of games in BASIC. And while I was too young to actually understand any of it, but I was sitting beside him looking, well, thinking and learning. So what happened was that a year later, when I was 7, I actually could program BASIC pretty good myself. Not pretty good, but I could do stuff that moved on the screen. So my parents, they had lived in the Netherlands for 2 years before I was born, but we were there visiting, and we went to a department store called Vroom and Dressman. And in there, they had just got a new model of a computer. This is 1981. So in 1981, they had this new computer, and no one in the computer store actually knew how it worked. But, well, I wasn't afraid of stuff, so I went there, started doing something, checking the keyboard, trying to move an X by prints and for loops, something like that. And my parents couldn't find me in this department store, so they were kind of worried. But what they did find was an audience of about 30 to 40 people standing around this 7-year-old boy who kind of were in this zone doing something that nobody has ever seen before. And what they didn't realize back then, that was me, so what they didn't realize back then was that this was a place where the future was being made today.
Dr. Bunsen Honeydew, here at Muppet Labs, where the future is being made today. And what a sad day it is, too, for Beaker, my fickle and wayward assistant, has gone missing. So I guess I'll have to demonstrate Muppet Labs' new copying machine a la carte. Beaker, what were you doing in there? If you've broken that machine, I shall have to dock your salary. You're beside yourself. 3 or 4 Oh, I've only got one thing to say. Help!
Okay, there are 2 people in the world. You see, this is sick, but don't worry. There are 2 people in the world who I owe all my interest in sounds and audio, apparently. So my next question is, who are these guys? Grandparents! That's true. Who said it? Here's a copy of Lazy Jones on cassette for Commodore 64 for you. So, my grandparents, what did they do? Well, they bought me this cassette recorder, battery operated, with a microphone on it. And what I did was that I started collecting sounds. I had a quite huge sound collection when I was a kid. I made my own radio shows, I recorded myself. I even tried to record the sound of a fire truck. Do you realize how difficult it is to get hold of the sound of a fire truck in 1980? But what happened was that my interest for audio, they got transformed into interest for computers. And in 1985, actually, I got to be part of the demo scene. So I started with the ABC-80 in 1983 around, and in 1985 I released my first demos on the demo scene. So I made quite a lot of demos, actually, because if you take a look at all the demos I've done in some kind of chronological order, well, they are not pretty, they are not that technical advanced, but there are lots of them, really many demos. I don't really realize how many weeks or nights I spent in doing all of this. But we're going to break somewhere, and we're going to break in 1988. So in 1988, there's a demo called CP Demo 5. And it's much better than it looks, because that's actually one of the first demos where I combined samples with synth sounds. It's some kind of music at least. Another thing to notice here is there's something up here. Mahoney and Cactus was formed. So I guess this was my entry into getting a pact with Cactus, because at the party where we actually formed Mahoney and Cactus, that was when I was releasing this one. So it's pretty insane, but it's I think it's okay. I've grown a lot since when I was 7, so later I looked something like this. Life was much better than that, though. I'm not always that sad, but let's scroll this page a little bit further to these are the other demos I've done. Let's get to another interesting point in time, and it's here. So up in 1988, in May, I made a music program. No, actually, I didn't make it, but I took Chris Hulsbeck's Music Maker and I adapted it to include samples as well. So this was probably the first time I took someone else's music program and added something to it, because I wasn't happy with the way it was to start with. So this was the first time I made a music program on the Commodore 64 where you could combine samples with music. So, but one thing I noticed as well was that computer music was one thing and real music, so to call it, was something completely different. You know computer music, but real music, well, it sounded something like this. It doesn't really sound like the computer music that we heard before, because most computer music I knew, well, it sounded like this. So that's a huge difference between the two, and I realized that these two, they had to merge somewhere, because I thought you were using computers for making music in studios, but actually they didn't. If you looked at a normal music studio at that time, it looked something like this. This is the studio where ABBA recorded their first 4 LPs, and well, this isn't really stuff that a 14-year-old boy could afford to buy. So, well, you had to do something else, and this is where the fun part starts, actually, because what happened around that time was this. I'm not sure if you can read it, but at least you can try. Back in June 1988, I actually bought my Amiga for 4,000 Swedish crowns. It didn't really happen like that, because it was like this. You paid someone money and they went to Germany and smuggled an Amiga into Sweden in the back trunk of a car. So it was kind of like, well, it's supposed to be delivered somewhere before this date. So it was like buying on a black market. But at least I got myself a cheap Amiga, and I'm quite happy for that, actually, because I met this girl. This is Paula. Paula is the audio chip in the Amiga 500, but technically this is the revision that was used in the Amiga 1000, but you probably don't know that, so unless I tell you, you wouldn't see that. With this one came a very nice program, this one, the Ultimate Sound Tracker. That was a really nice program. It contained loads of bugs, so it was quite frustrating to use it. But anyway, let's get on with the demos, shall we? So, I had my Amiga, did some Amiga demos, some 64 demos. I quit the 64 and I started doing only Amiga demos. This is the North Star Fairlight Mega Demo 3. These are, well, you've seen some of them, I guess. But, well, let's stop at, well, that Sounds of Gnome Music Tracker, and this is NoiseTracker. So, now you know, now you can see where we're going with this, with this talk, can't you? So, well, we have a NoiseTracker. It has a history, and let's jump forward from 1989, where we are now, until today. So if we take a look at music programs today, this graph needs a little explanation. Every column you see here is a software release of a tracker program. Down here you can see the OpenMPT, which is a rather new tracker in 2015. And we're going to scroll through this graph up till the very, very top here and see what we can find. So we start with OpenMPT here. We're going to go through all these screen trackers and fast trackers on the PC side of tracking history. We go over to the Pro Tracker and the Amiga side of things. And when we get into the top up here, you can find the NoiseTracker up here, which has its place in the tracker graph here. And up at the very, very top, you're going to see, well, the ultimate sound tracker from Kostanobaski here. It looked like this. It was a program that did things pretty well, actually. It didn't show you much. Like, it didn't always scroll things, and you couldn't save a module, but at least you could do music with it. So here's the Rally Master, I think. One thing to note is that when you play the song, it doesn't scroll the pattern, so quite frustrating there. Now, this wasn't the only tracker program, as you saw in the graph, so I'm going to show you another tracker program, which was the one that I was so disgusted of, so I really had to change it, because there was this really, really bad version of SoundTracker, which was the Dock SoundTracker. There's two things I don't like about this SoundTracker, and this is the really, really bad thing. When I'm in the creative zone of making music, I don't want to read a fucking scroll text. That's a no-no. So I somehow had to get rid of that scroll text, and my solution to that first was to actually tape something on my monitor to hide it. But in the end, I found a better way, and that was to just rewrite the program. Anyway, there's some features missing in this one, which I lacked, and that was like putting your own samples in this program. You couldn't do that. Well, you could. You could exit the program, start a sampler program, save your samples as an IFF file, then import them into an IFF stripper to convert them into raw audio data to strip the IFF header, and then you can manually edit a playlist or the PLST file, and then you could use your own samples in this. What's so funny in that? That was too cumbersome to be even remotely funny. So I took this program, I disassembled it into, well, it was some 1,400 lines of code, 200 kilobytes of source code, and made something like this. For the NoiseTracker first versions, I used the Seca assembler, mostly because I just loved the speed of the text editing in that one. That was a pure 50 FPS experience here. Well, this is NoiseTracker 2.0. Looking like this, it's going to load a pattern or load a song up here. For NoiseTracker 2.0, I switched to ASM1, mostly because it could use segments as well, which meant that we could save quite a lot of memory, because some parts of the program went into the fast memory, if you had an expansion memory, and only some parts need to stay resident in the chip area of the memory. So that was a huge improvement, which led that people could actually start making music like this. is this cheating or is it okay? This is a sample, of course, but it's still music, isn't it? If you take this kind of modules and play it to someone who's not in this room, they will actually say that this is pretty good music. To me, this is just cheating because they're not really using. As you can see, they're playing the left and right channels here to make some kind of stereo image, and so this is actually a 2-channel module, but it sounds pretty okay, at least in my ears. So I was kind of happy. This was really what I wanted, to make a program that people could use to make something like real music. The SoundTracker 2.0 was released at the Swedish Elite Easter Conference in 1990 in this room here. This party was held in a school in Gothenburg, I think. Most people, they stayed in their rooms, having separate places, but me and Cactus, we took our parked our computers here up on the stage, which meant that we can also hijack the stereo equipment of the room. So it was a fun party for me, at least, in 1990. According to Poet.net, the NoiseTracker was considered by many to be the most important tracker in the tracker history since the Ultimate SoundTracker. Well, that's up until the Pro Tracker came along. So I'm getting closer to the end of my talk here, but we're gonna end in style. So the first thing to show you is this. So I sold my Amiga for 3,200 Swedish crowns, which meant that for 800 Swedish crowns I had fun in 3 years. I'm not sure if I could get away this cheap anywhere else, having loads of fun during 3 years. But anyone in here who knows what I used that money for? Waterbed, that's true. So I sold my Amiga in 91 and I bought a waterbed. So Jimmy, here's a prize for you. Here are the original diskettes for the Macintosh operating system 6.7 of the game Dark Castle. So I'm going to give you an unfair chance of thinking about questions that you could ask me. So if you're ready to make some answers or questions, then think about it and shout them out right now. Okay, I have some questions for you because I have some prizes left here. Which is the best module ever made in a tracker? Any suggestions? Enigma? Anyone else? Guitar Slinger? No, Enigma is the right answer. So here's another copy of 1984 by. So I got another question for you. At what age did I get part of the demo scene? 85, that's true. How old was I, Petin? 85 is correct. How old was I back in 1985? 11, that's correct. So, here's a Rubik's Cube for you. If you're being nice, I can solve it for you in the bar afterwards. So, the last thing I want to tell you about NoiseTracker is that there's quite a lot of seniors. You saw the letters I got from people that have grown up with NoiseTracker and had that as the experience platform of getting to know music and getting to get a feeling for how to make music. I'm going to tell you about this quite known guy from the demo scene called Quasar, or Frontline Sanction. He's also known as Axel Hedfors, Axwell of Swedish House Mafia. I have to warn you a little bit because he has slightly higher budget when it comes to confetti than I have, but I think you'd enjoy it anyway. that's the end of my talk for today. Thanks for listening. It's really nice to spend time with you here.
Yes, that was Mahoney explaining the background and the backstory of NoiseTracker and how we had a kind of boring life in Sweden back in the 80s. We couldn't do much. We have a bit of actual Swedish house mapping in the background. I'll just tune that down a bit. But yes, it's quite nice to actually get to hear the backstory behind things. I do know it though, because I do know Mahoney quite well, so I've heard it a bunch of times. But it's good fun.